Morning and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Welcome to everyone on social media, on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. I'm Cheryl Senhouse. I'm the Finance Innovation Director with the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator. And this morning we're discussing designing climate smart projects with my colleague Kiesha Farnum, who is the Director of Public Sector Projects with the organization. We're going to jump right into our discussion, but first, Kiesha, I'm going to give you the opportunity to tell us a bit about what you do with the CCSA.
Good morning, Cheryl, and thank you so much for facilitating this conversation. I'm quite excited to jump into it. As you would have mentioned, I'm the Director for Public Sector Projects. I oversee the development of our internal and external facing public and private sector project development work, as well as manage the relationships with our key stakeholders. So government leaders, bilateral partners, multilaterals, impact investors, foundations, and other public bodies. My background is in development. I've been in the field of development for the last 19 years. I've worked across 17 countries and now 28 countries with the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator. And I've worked with the likes of the Australian Agency for International Development, Global Affairs Canada, the Inter-American Development Bank, and most recently, in my last incarnation, I was the Managing Director of Walker's Institute for Regenerative Research, Education, and Design, a nonprofit research center and consultancy that focuses on climate smart strategies with demonstrated ecosystem-based mitigation and adaptation. And I'm still actually on the board of Wired.
So great. Thanks, Kiesha. You have a lot of experience there. So I think you're the exact right person for this conversation this morning. So we're going to jump right in. And to kind of set the stage for our discussion, I'm going to ask you to provide some context so that we can understand the problem that we're trying to solve. So, at a high level, tell us, what is climate change? How does it manifest itself? And how does it impact individuals and the society at large?
Cheryl, I think this is definitely a question that a lot of us within the development field take for granted. I think we just kind of understand what it means and the ramifications, and we assume that the general public also does, right? But climate change is, very simply put, the drastic change in global and regional climate patterns that would have appeared around the mid-20th century onwards that has been attributed to increased levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide produced by the use of fossil fuels. And I think the key word here is drastic, right? So climate patterns have changed throughout the years. That's normal. But this drastic, unprecedented change that we're seeing and the speed at which it is happening, that I think is the thing that actually makes climate change in this context a thing, right? And I also think that a good way for the average person to think about it is how it impacts our everyday lives, right? So it impacts different people in different ways. It could mean an impact on our health, our ability to grow food, housing, safety, work. And for some of us who live in more vulnerable areas, such as small island nations, like Barbados or Trinidad, Jamaica, or any of the Caribbean islands, and in other developing countries like those in Africa, these conditions are creating, havoc. It's, in some places it's famine and drought. In other places, it's sea level rise and saltwater intrusion that really affects communities across the world and are affecting us here in the Caribbean. I mean, we only have to look at each successive hurricane season and some of the really bad hurricanes that we've had to just see the impact of climate change on those nations that are truly vulnerable. And I think now, so even more than before, we're actually seeing it in nations that we would not have considered as vulnerable from before. So if you look at the news, there's massive flooding and fires in developed countries that are wreaking havoc, right? So we could definitely see the changes and how it is impacting us as individuals.
So I'm glad that you mentioned some of the knock-on effects. The extent of the impact is not always clear, and sometimes the more complex and less visible impacts really are not seen or talked about as much as they should be.
Yeah.
So what are we doing about this challenge overall? What commitments have been made at the public and private sector level to address the climate crisis? And I want you to share with us, in two areas, what's happening at country level and what's happening at the level of businesses to address the issue.
So Cheryl, before I jump into the country and business level, I think it's important to disaggregate the type of work that happens within the climate change space. So climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation. And that's two things that you hear, particularly when you're looking for funding that is related to climate change. You hear, is your climate change project a mitigation project or an adaptation project? And I think this will really help to set the stage for the country level commitments as well as the business level.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So mitigation refers to the efforts to reduce or prevent emissions of greenhouse gases. And that mitigation could be using new technologies, renewable energies, making sure that existing equipment, processes, and infrastructure is functioning in a more efficient way, or changing management practices or consumer behavior. When we talk about adaptation, we look at how do we adjust to the current effects of climate change to protect communities and naturally occurring ecosystems. So mitigation is how do we stop or how do we prevent the emission of more greenhouse gases? Adaptation is how do we deal with the issues that we already have, right? And adaptation could be incremental in that it's, you look at preserving the integrity of a system over time, or it could be transformative in which you literally change the fundamental attributes of a system so that it can withstand the impacts of climate change. And of course, the need for adaptation is going to vary from place to place because remember, I would have said before, different countries are affected differently, right? So what adaptation might look like for a country that is suffering from drought and famine is different for what adaptation might look like for a country that has sea level rise and salt intrusion. Now, moving into the country level and the business level. At the country level, in December 2015, in recognition of the climate crisis, 179 countries and the EU would have gotten together at a conference and they would have agreed that they would work together to make sure that there was, to keep global warming below 2 degrees Celsius, and even went further to say 1.5 degrees Celsius through the reduction of the emission of greenhouse gases. And this conference was called the 21st Conference of Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. It's a mouthful. So it was abbreviated to COP21, right? And each successive year, the conference was called 22, 23. So actually this year, we're going to have COP27 in Egypt this year. Last year, it was in Glasgow, right? But at this gathering, this is where world leaders, they made a commitment to intended nationally determined contributions, or INDCs for short, right? So you hear persons referring to, countries doing their NDCs. That's what that is. It was this commitment that they made at this conference, their intended nationally determined contributions. And what that would embody is that for each country, they would make a commitment to reduce national emissions and adapt to the impacts of climate change. So each country would pursue domestic mitigation measures and with the aim of contributing towards this overall goal of keeping warming below 1.5 degrees. What is supposed to happen is that each successive year, each country will update their NDC and will send it to the UNFCCC Secretariat. And it is supposed to be a progression over time. So let me use a real life example of how this works. So for example, the government of St. Lucia would have committed a mitigation target for renewable energy generation of 35% in electricity generation by 2020 and an energy efficiency target of 20% reduction in electricity consumption by 2020. To meet this target, they would have completed so far a 3.7 megawatt solar facility and are currently planning a 12 megawatt wind farm, as well as a 30 megawatt geothermal project. And they would have secured funding from the World Bank to the tune of about 21.9 million to fund geothermal energy exploration in St. Lucia. This commitment also had other trickle-down effects in terms of the types of supporting projects that would be developed over time, right? So for example, the Institute for Environmental Analytics, that's funded by the UK Space Agency's International Partnership Program, they have a tool called Energy Metric, which looks at weather patterns, among other things, to provide real-time data that is needed to help inform the government what the optimal energy mix would be in order for them to meet the targets that they would have set in their nationally determined contributions. So at the national level, you have these targets that are set. How does that influence the design of climate smart projects? How does that translate into the average person who wants to do a climate project within a country? Understanding the commitments of your country will allow you to better frame your project and its justification in that context. So there may also be incentives that the government may produce associated with those commitments. And there may also be funding available for projects that would help the government to meet those targets. A very concrete example of that is of how that country level commitment can trickle down into underground initiatives is in Barbados. So Barbados renewable energy generation target is 100% by 2030. And their energy efficiency target is 20% reduction by 2030. And this is indicated in their nationally determined contributions. The mechanisms for Barbadian households to own and install renewable energy systems from up to about 10 kilowatts was actually announced last week. And the Ministry of Energy officially launched its online registration process. It's a 4-minute process, following which householders will be able to receive their certificate of registration that they can take to Barbados Light and Power to ensure connectivity to the grid. The aim of this project is to get 50,000 householders on board in the initial phase. And thus far, they have over 4,000 households already registered and businesses that have made the investment in renewable energy, particularly photovoltaic. This initiative that has impacted on the ground is as a direct result of the NDCs or the commitments that the government would have made at that level. And then at the business level now, so at the corporate level, the Business Ambition for 1.5 campaign, which was led by the Science Based Target Initiative in partnership with the UN Global Compact and We Mean Business Coalition. This is the standard by which businesses measure their course to net zero, right? And so as of 2021, the science-based target saw over 750 companies from across more than 10 countries worldwide that would have committed to this target. And the thing is, because there's so many ways that different companies and so many things that different companies can do to get to this target, we really needed to create a standard. And that's where the net zero standard came in. So the net zero standard is basically a standard that is based on science. It provides guidance, criteria, and the recommendations for companies so that they can set their science-based targets and commit to this 1.5 degree commitment that would have been set. Now, what that allows is that everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet. There is one barometer at which everybody's being measured, and you can work towards the goal of becoming net zero strategically and avoid, and it definitely creates less room for greenwashing. So again, another example is that of CEMEX. People would probably not be familiar with CEMEX throughout the region, but CEMEX is actually the cement, a regional cement company, and is found on most of our Caribbean islands. And CEMEX, through their Future in Action initiative, would have made commitments, several commitments. And those commitments meant that they are looking at how they can reduce emissions across the entire value chain, right? So they're looking at how they reduce emissions through their processes, how they reduce emissions by their electricity and heat generation, looking at even their suppliers and end users. So it's a whole of an organization approach, and they have signed on to this Business Ambition for 1.5 campaign. How does that, again, impact on the ground? If we're looking at funding or strategic partnerships with corporations or through corporate social responsibility initiatives, it's always important to understand what is this company's overarching commitments. And that commitment will then allow you to phrase your project within that framework and allow you to show how your project can help this company to meet their objectives.
Great, Kiesha. Thanks for that explanation. Very helpful in terms of understanding what is happening overall and what those frameworks look like for addressing climate change. So I'm going to go back to your response at the country level in terms of what's happening there. And you spoke a lot about NDCs, the nationally determined contributions. But another term that we hear a lot about is the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. Tell us a bit about those. What are they? And how do they impact and integrate into climate action from the perspective of development work overall?
So the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or the UN SDGs, they would have been adopted by all United Nations member states in 2015. And basically what it is supposed to be is a roadmap or a blueprint for peace, prosperity, for people and for planet now and into the future. And I always like to quote that because it does sound very idealistic. But on a very concrete level, the UN Development Goals looks at a number of strategic initiatives that can lead to global partnerships for change and for action that would improve the quality of lives of individuals. So improve health, improve education, reduce inequality, spur economic growth, all while tackling climate change and working to preserve the oceans and the forests. Now, at CCSA, we have three main focus areas. We focus on renewable energy, we focus on 30 by 30 nature-based solutions, which includes blue economy and climate smart agriculture, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and economic resilience through the creation of green jobs. So we don't necessarily address all 17 of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals in our work. More specifically, we look at goal number 5, which is gender equality and empowerment of women and girls. Goal number 7, which is affordable and clean energy, which you can see clearly ties back into our renewable energy focus. Decent work and economic growth ties right back into our focus on economic resilience through the creation of green jobs. Industry, innovation, and infrastructure, that is a cross-cutting theme that falls within both energy area and the creation of new jobs. Sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production. Of course, number 13 is climate action. And goal 14 is life below water. And goal 15 is life on land. And then goal 17 is partnerships for goals. So the partnerships that are formed in order to meet all the goals that would have been mentioned before. Now, these goals are, in some cases, the main theme of a project. So it might be that your project is focused on life below water. So your focus, let's say, maybe is a sargassum seaweed project and how you can mitigate the impact of sargassum seaweed and use it for some type of industry, right? The project may be focused on life on land, so looking at conservation or ridge to reef interactions. It could be looking at how we have sustainable communities and cities through, effective waste management. So there's a number of ways that the UN Development Goals can interact with your project, both as primary, a primary aspect of that project or primary focus, or as cross-cutting themes. So for example, gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls can be a cross-cutting theme. But what I would do is encourage individuals to go onto the UN website. They have lots of infographics and lots of information that can really help break down for you in a very concrete and easy to understand way how the UN Development Goals feed back into a lot of the work that we're doing, but also how it can feed back into your project as you look at how you develop a project or initiative.
So Kiesha, you mentioned two things in your responses. Greenwashing, which I hope we can come back to before we get to the end of the session. But you also mentioned cross-cutting themes, and you gave a couple of examples of cross-cutting themes, but I want you to expand on that a little bit. Tell us, what that term means, what it means in the context of a project, and how it can enhance project design, if at all.
So cross-cutting themes are additional issues or areas that intersect with the main project or can easily integrate in the project without losing the main focus or goal, right? So it is not the main focus, it's a secondary focus. Okay. And these themes can be an effective tool for explaining how you want to create impact within or additional impact within your project, or that the impact that you already have can have a wider effect. So for example, a project addressing climate resilience, that may be the primary goal, right? It could also improve, let's say, the health or income of local farmers. Examples of cross-cutting themes that you see particularly now since COVID, one is a post-COVID recovery. A lot of projects and funding, calls for funding, you see, how does your project support post-COVID recovery? Environment, livelihood generation, so generation of jobs, gender and social inclusion, so improve the life of women and girls, but also make sure that other marginalized members of society, whether that may be persons with disabilities, the elderly, at-risk youth, how could they be impacted by this project? And then environmental, social, and governance issues, which is a whole other topic by itself. And I think might be a good next step for us to discuss in another CCSA session. But when you're thinking about the cross-cutting themes in your projects, I think it's important to make sure that you don't lose sight of the original project and what you intended to do by adding too many components. I'll use another example. So for example, you're focused on a renewable energy project, and that project, the main goal of that project is bringing reliable electricity to, let's say, a remote fishing village. In this case, the overall goal of the project is to improve access to clean electricity. That's your main goal, right? However, that project could be easily designed to make sure that the installation of the solar panels also ensures that women and girls receive equal access to those benefits, right? And so here you're able to bring into play gender and social inclusion as a cross theme, right? Additionally, projects could train local community members on how to build and maintain the same solar panels, which would also bring in cross-cutting theme of vocational training and job growth, which will take into consideration livelihood generation. So when you're building your project, without straying too far off course, it's always great to look at, okay, what are some of the cross-cutting themes that are important to the person who's providing the funding, but also from a community aspect, how can I make this for-profit project also have a social impact element for it, which also, I think in terms of project development really makes it a very powerful makes a very powerful argument when you can have multiple forms of impact coming out of one project.
Okay, great. So let's pull everything that we've discussed together right now and consolidate the idea and the key criteria for a climate smart project. What are the key points that you have to hit to be able to meet that definition?
Well, we've been using the term climate smart project, and just as a playful anecdote, when I took this job, and I told my parents what I would be doing, and I said, "Oh, we'll be building climate smart projects," and both of them looked at me and said, "What does that mean?" Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we've been using the term a lot, not just CCSA, but other organizations have been using that term a lot. And so if I had to put a different definition to it, I would say it's a transformative and integrated approach to addressing climate change and developing systems and ways of doing business that promote green and climate resilient practices, right? So it includes projects that enhance or build resilience, reduce emissions, and also create synergies and trade-offs that exist between productivity, adaptation, mitigation. And it is aimed at creating these new opportunities, right? So when we think about climate change, particularly within this region, the Caribbean has always been very much focused on projects that are grant focused and very socially focused or environmentally focused, which is important. But I think with a climate smart approach, you're not just looking at it from a project basis, project to project basis. You're looking at how does this approach work in the entire system? How are we building a resilient system that encapsulates other things within the system, and it's not just this individual project, as well as how are we thinking about projects and funding, right? So it's not just about grant funding, it's how are we thinking about projects in a way that they can be businesses, that they can be sustainable, that they can invest in themselves going forward and grow and make the region a more resilient region.
Great, thank you for that. So Kiesha, we're going to get a little bit more into the detail of what we do as an organization. And at the beginning, you spoke about your role, and I know that a big part of your work is about project evaluation and providing feedback and support to our project developers. And we actually spend a lot of time within the organization doing that. So what I want you to do is to explain to our audience what we're looking for in terms of project design. And I want you to actually walk a potential project owner through the process of submitting a project to us for review by telling us the type of information that's required to submit a project via our project portal on the website. So what do they have to do? And when we get that information, what is it that we are looking for?
Okay, so as we and persons would have seen, I call for projects, and I think I want to preface what I'm about to say by, we've been doing this for about 2 years in terms of call for projects, and we try to make sure that we learn from our experiences and we pay that forward. So we're actually in the process of redesigning our project portal, and that will be launched quite soon. Simply because we realized that we wanted to make it fit for purpose, but we also wanted to make it easy for persons to understand. I think sometimes as development professionals, the trap that we fall into is falling into the development speak, right? And we tend to design things we design things from a place of knowing, even just the use of acronyms, the acronyms that we use so off the cuff and just expect that everybody else would know what we're talking about. So just that process of breaking down the application process and making it easy to understand, but also trying to kind of step away from development speak, and in the places where we've had to use development speak to provide an explanation, in the portal so that we can make it easier for persons to put their best foot forward. So the new portal, you're going to, when you click on submit a project, you're going to click, I want to apply for fit for purpose funding for the Climate Smart, for my Climate Smart project or business. And what does fit for purpose funding mean? Well, we have a number of matchmaking mechanisms, and we're constantly working to source new opportunities. So questions that we ask will help us to be able to determine what type of funding your project or business needs, right? So it's not just grant funding, right? We look at different types of funding, which I'll elaborate on a little bit later. But, when we say fit for purpose funding, it may be that your project may not be in need of grant funding. It may be that you're in need of a different type of funding. And as I said, I don't want to jump ahead. So just kind of moving chronologically. In terms of how we evaluate your project, we will be evaluating projects based on stage of readiness, relevance, innovation, scalability, quality of the methodology, the stakeholder support, the investment type, committed, the investment that you already have committed, the thoroughness of your business plan, as well as the capacity of the individual or team to carry out the project. And project evaluation takes place internally, the CCSA, and that selection process has two distinct stages. Stage one is the project submission through the portal and the initial shortlisting. And then stage two is a detailed due diligence to shortlisted proposals by the CCSA Projects Committee. I make a commitment to make sure that we get back to everybody who has submitted a project to us, whether it has been successful or not. So I think I need to reiterate that submitting to the portal does not guarantee that your project will be matched. But I do make the commitment that if you've made the effort to send a project to us, whether it's been successful or not, or has moved to the next stage or not, we will get back to you and let you know. All right, we're just not going to leave you hanging. And it is important to note that if your project is selected, you will be required to submit a full project or business plan. So if you're not sure if your project or business plan is detailed enough, we also seek to provide some links to some light reading resources that can help you to just kind of figure out whether you're in the right direction. But we also recommend that before you start the process on the portal that you have certain things handy. So you should have your business plan handy, and you should have certain information about your organization. So for example, your company registration number, if that is applicable, you should have that on hand before you start the registration process. So walking through the process, we would have explained all that to you in the first few slides, right? And then we just take your basic demographic information, your organization type, look at any other relevant registration information that you could provide, and then you get started from there. You will be required to tell us the name of your project and to give us a justification for that project, right? You will also be required to provide us with any media links that you might have. So do you have a website? In some cases, you might have a Facebook page or an IG page or something, maybe LinkedIn. You can provide us with that information there. You will be required to identify which one of our focus areas your project or business address. So I would have mentioned them before, but they're renewable energy, the 30 by 30 nature-based solutions, which includes the blue economy and climate smart agriculture, as well as physical and economic resilience through the creation of green jobs. It is possible, as we discussed previously, for your project to address more than one area. So, you will be able to choose more than one option if it does apply. You will be expected to identify your project or business plan's alignment with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Again, I encourage you to just do a little bit of research. There are lots of tools available on all the UN agency sites that will help you to understand the UN development goals, very, very quickly and be able to make the link between those goals and what you're trying to accomplish with your project. We would also ask whether your project looks at adaptation and mitigation or both. And we would have talked about that before. What is adaptation? What is mitigation? But we also provide an explanation on the portal. Does your project or business have any specific environmental, social, and governance goals? And that light reading material, we're going to provide some links to that information too as well. But I think just as a teaser, we are planning to have another live session that is going to focus on environmental and social governance. And we'll be talking to Cheryl. I will be talking to Cheryl on that one. So I'm really excited for that, but I think it's going to provide a really good, solid basis for understanding, how environmental, social, and governance safeguards fall within the outline of your project. Does your project include business or business plan include diversity, equity, inclusion, and climate justice considerations? So we talked about cross-cutting themes. And so what you would be expected to articulate here is what those concepts mean to your organization and what goals you have set or plan to set that will allow them to be realized within your project. Now, remember we spoke about not trying to make sure that whatever cross-cutting themes we include does not run us off course. So you don't have to cover all of them in your project, but make sure that there is some consideration for cross-cutting themes in your project that can deepen the impact of your project. Does your project create green jobs? We will ask you approximately how many. We would look at the member countries that you intend to deploy your project or business. So we are across 28 countries. We have 28 member countries. And so you will be able to articulate, okay, this is a one country project, or is it across several countries? There's a pick list. You get to choose the countries. And then we also would ask you about how long your project would take to deploy, or how long you would take to deliver your business plan or project in number of years. Now comes the part that I think a lot of people struggle with, but it is very, very important, and that's the financial information. You do need to understand what the total estimated cost of your project is going to be, and you do need to understand the type of funding you require. So do you require equity funding? So equity funding refers to an investment of money in your project that involves the purchasing of shares in that business or project, or is it debt financing, which is the acquisition of funds by borrowing money to be paid back at a later date, of course, with interest? Are you looking for grant funding? What type of grant funding is it? Is it catalytic grant funding, right? So it's understanding, and again, I encourage you to do some research. And we're constantly adding new resources to our website to be able to answer some of these questions. But, a quick Google search of these terms, of these definitions, and I think would be able to give you an idea of what type of financing you want to be able to look for. We're also going to ask you about your financing history in terms of whether you would have applied for financing for this project before, who have you approached, how much did you ask for, what was the type of financing, and how did that person respond. We also want to make sure that, maybe there's an opportunity for us to provide assistance outside of matching with funders. And so there's a question that relates to that. So is it that we might be able to help with technical assistance, but there is an opportunity for you to indicate whether there is assistance that you're looking for outside of matching with funds, and we may be able to match you with an organization that can provide that specific assistance. And then, of course, in terms of the type of solution, so we talked about climate smart projects, and we talked about it being a whole of systems approach. We talked about climate change being something that requires innovation. It requires a new way of doing things and thinking about things. And so we do tend to favor projects that are innovative, that are new, that are unique. And we are going to ask you about that. So we would ask you about what stage best describes your project. And we We have what we call a demonstration or pilot project, and we have an explanation for what that is. We have what the first, is it a first of kind project? So is it that you are establishing this project to prove a track record that is intended to be profitable later on? Is it a startup or early stage project? Or is it a mature project or mature business model that you're looking at scaling? It's already financially successful, but you want to be able to scale it. And so those questions help us to really narrow in on what type of funding you need and make sure that that's where that fit for purpose comes in, right? So if we understand what your needs are, we're better able to match you with the right type of funders to be able to meet those needs. In terms of building regional resilience, we do ask a question about whether your project has the opportunity to create exports for the region. And finally, in terms of some of the, what I like to call nitty-gritty, we do ask whether your project or plan can demonstrate commercial viability and ability to generate returns. So what does that mean? That includes, a comprehensive market research, sales and revenue forecast, sales and marketing strategy, supply and production plans, forecasts, production service models. Do you have your ROI worked on, or your ROE worked out? So it does require, and this is definitely for projects that are looking for equity and debt financing, you need to be able to have this type of information in order to be able to move your project forward. And then, of course, we give you an opportunity to provide us with a one-pager or executive summary of your project. And that would include the project description, project justification, the overall value of the project, timelines, execution deliverables, etc. And then we also give you an opportunity to also send to us any other supporting information that you might have. So is it like a market report or a pitch deck, impact assessment, community engagement report, or anything else that you could help us to evaluate your project? I think finally, what I would say is we do have a number of mechanisms by which we do our matching with funders. And so there is a question that asks, would you be willing to be featured in our investor forum? And we have one coming up on the 6th of September. So we encourage you to go onto our website and register for that so you can get an idea of what we do at our investor forum. But yeah, so there are various mechanisms. And again, those are available on our website. So I don't want to overload you with too much information, but I definitely want to encourage you to visit our website to get an idea of some of our other matching mechanisms that we use.
So, yeah, Kiesha, that sounds like a lot of information. I think
it is a lot.
We understand what we do with that information, but I just want you to kind of underscore for the audience why that is necessary and how we use it. And, perhaps you mentioned the investor forum, so that may be a good example to give a quick overview of how that information may integrate with one of our matchmaking mechanisms.
Yeah, maybe I could use the example of the one that's coming up, right?
Yeah.
September 6th. So this particular investor forum is focusing on blue economy projects. We've had 2 investor forums since last year, and they would have been focused on different thematic areas. This one is on blue economy. And so we're looking at projects that sustainably use ocean resources for economic growth, improve livelihood or job creation, whilst preserving the health of the oceans and ecosystems. And particularly as island states, a lot of our economy is dependent on the ocean resources, right? So when you think about blue economy projects, examples would be tourism, of course, climate change in terms of mitigation and adaptation. There might be coral reef restoration projects, etc., ridge to reef impact projects, coastal protection, waste management, maritime transport, fisheries, ocean research and data collection, and then of course, even renewable energy, because there is ocean-driven renewable energy. So for example, nearshore wind, solar and wave energy generation. So all of those will fall under blue economy projects. We are looking at specific cross-cutting themes for these projects. So post-COVID recovery, which I would have mentioned previously, livelihood generation, remember that's creation of jobs, gender and social inclusion, environmental, social and governance, as well as the UN Sustainable Development Goal number 14, which is life below water. Right, so this event is going to be streamed and features a diverse panel of high-level speakers and investors who have been meticulously curated to add value to this process. And so you get to hear directly from these investors what they are looking for in good blue economy projects, right? And it was designed to bring in entrepreneurs and financiers together, investors, donors, philanthropists to the space, directly to the project holders, where you have an opportunity to ask questions and to hear about other projects that are happening in the region. And then, of course, at the end of this session, there's an opportunity for matching of projects with some of those very investors that would have presented at the forum. So far, we found this to be an incredibly successful mechanism as a tool for, I think, educating project holders, but also just kind of climatizing the donors, the investors, the philanthropists to what's happening in the region, because some of them are new investors to this space, to this region. But they are presenting new opportunities for us to be able to move our climate smart objectives forward. So very excited for this. Please visit our website. You can register from our website. It is free of charge, and it's going to be on the 6th of September. And Cheryl, remind me of the time. It starts at 9.
Starts at 9 a.m.
Starts at 9 a.m.
Standard Time.
9 a.m. Standard Atlantic Time. Yeah. So
yep.
It's a great opportunity. And we would have done a call for projects, and individuals who would have answered that call for projects would have answered many of the questions that I would have just gone through in submitting their project. But I think what you're going to find is that once you understand what you're being asked, it makes it a bit easier, So it does seem like a lot as I'm going through it, but I think if you have a moment to really digest it and understand, and you do a bit of research before you submit your project, you realize that a lot of it is already in there. You just didn't realize it. And it's just understanding what we're asking for and then being able to give that to us.
Great. So we have about 10 minutes remaining, Kiesha, and I'm going to send some questions your way to kind of expand on the information that we've covered. So we have a question from YouTube. Lion M asks, where can we get more information if there's a project that someone would like to submit? And I know you covered this a bit, but just go back and give us that information again.
Yeah. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to the contact page on our website. You're going to select the option, I would like to apply for fit for purpose funding for my climate smart project or business. And then it will walk you through all of the questions with explanations and some link to additional resources for you to be able to submit your project via that portal, right? If you reach out to us via email at hello@caribbeanaccelerator.org, we're going to redirect you to the website to be able to submit your project via the portal, right? Because it does help us. We do receive a lot of projects, and it helps us. We're a very small team. It helps us to disaggregate projects, but also to make sure that we really get the information that we need. And it's less stress for you, and it's also less stress for us. So again, you're going to go to our website, go to the contact page. You're going to select the option, I would like to apply for fit for purpose funding for my climate smart project or business, and then follow the instructions from there.
Okay, And the next question is, how important is future marketability of projects in terms of your project being selected?
So our focus at CCSA is to try to bring new financing to the region. And if we're looking at the type of investment, impact investment, venture capitalist funds, and even some type of philanthropy funding is not grant funding, right? So there needs to be some form of sustainability in terms of taking your project forward. We want to be able to support projects that create businesses that create a market that could create jobs, right? And so I would say in some cases, extremely important that there is marketability. I'm not saying that we won't consider a project if there is no marketability, but I think definitely projects that have a strong marketability focus is important because it helps to create that resilient economic climate that we're trying to create around climate change.
Great. So Kiesha, I'm going to take you back to a phrase that you used earlier, which was greenwashing. And I'm going to ask you to kind of, we like to be positive. So we've explained exactly what a climate smart project is so far, but I want you to kind of bring everything together for us and address the greenwashing issue in the context of what a climate smart project is not.
Right. So I think it's probably good to go back to, and I'm not going to use any examples. I'm not throwing stones, but I'm going to go back to what a company or a project or a business that is serious about meeting net zero standards, what that means, right? It means that they are looking at their entire value chain, right? And how they can cut emissions across their entire value chain. So it includes looking at their own processes, their internal process, and what are the emissions across that. It looks at how they source their power, their electricity, their heat, right? To generate whatever it is that they need to do. And it also looks at their suppliers and end users, right? So for example, let's say you have a sustainable fashion business, and I think this is one of the easier examples to about. You have a sustainable fashion business, and you say, for every t-shirt that you purchase from us, we're going to donate it to this organization that plants mangroves, right? But when we look at your value chain as a fashion, the fashion business, you are, getting cheap materials from, a country on the other side of the world that employs questionable practices in terms of the way that they treat their employees, that uses really harmful chemicals that they dump into the river of that country where you're importing it from, right? To bring these t-shirts across, your carbon footprint, is through the roof. But then you say, you know what? At the end, I'm going to take a percentage of this sales and I'm giving it to a mangrove organization. That is greenwashing because you haven't looked at your entire value chain. And there is a way within each industry to be able to look at your value chain and look at the standards and see, okay, how can I look at reducing my footprint throughout my entire value chain, right? And I think that for me is how you avoid greenwashing.
Absolutely.
Right, in your projects,
Okay, great example. We have a question from LinkedIn from Andres, who's asking, can an INGO
Sorry,
register?
Cheryl, I think I lost you.
Right, so we have a question from Andres. Are you hearing me?
I think Cheryl's frozen.
Hi, Kiesha. Yeah, so I think we may have lost Kiesha. So we are at the 4-minute mark for our event. We just have 4 minutes left. I'll address the question from Andres, who's asked, can an INGO register to implement joint projects focused on resilience and mitigation of the effects of climate change? Kiesha, you're back. So certainly you can, Andres.
I'm back.
Yep.
So I'm not sure what just happened, but yes, I'm back.
Yeah. So Andres, you can go to our website and go to our contact us, and you will register as an investor with the CCSA. And there's quite a bit of information that you need to provide as well that will allow us to undertake our due diligence. So same location, you'll make the appropriate selection and provide the information to be able to go through the due diligence and vetting process for project implementers and potential investors. All right, so I think, Kiesha, I'm going to ask you at this stage to give us your closing comments overall on how do we achieve, well-designed climate smart projects within the region.
So I think before I jump into that, the one thing that I would say, because I wasn't sure whether I got cut off when I was saying that, is that we are in the process of redesigning the portal. So right now, the ability to be able to submit projects is closed, as well as to be able to submit as an investor. But that is going to be reopened quite shortly, and you can look out on our social media. We will put it on blast that we're open, we've reopened it, and that you have the ability to be able to submit projects, or as an investor submit your desire to invest. Closing remarks. This space has been a really interesting space to inhabit. It's a learning process for all of us. Even being in the field for the last 19 years, I am learning. It requires me doing my due diligence and researching and learning about different things. And so to understand that the process is a learning process, and that if you are willing and serious about it, you put in the time and the commitment to be able to do the research, ask the questions, get the advice, so that you could really design a project or move something forward that is going to be meaningful. That whole idea of cross-cutting themes is something that I think that a lot of people tend to forget. And it's often quite easy to build in that element of social good that you can bring into a project, particularly when there is a climate focus. And then the last thing that I would say is we appreciate you and we appreciate the efforts. I mean, I'm constantly blown away at the innovativeness of this region, and the kind of ideas that people come up with. And, I say to investors who might be on this call, the region is ripe with opportunity. And if you're serious about getting involved with us, yes, there's some growing to happen, but I think if you're willing to grow alongside us, there's a lot of great opportunities that you could feel really, really good about if you were to get involved with our region. So I think I'm going to close there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kiesha. Thank you for sharing lots of great information, and I hope that it has been useful for our audience. Thank you to everyone for joining us. Please follow us on social media, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to stay up to date with our work. And you can also subscribe to our newsletter to get updates and perspectives on how we mobilize climate action across the region. Please also register to join us for our Investor Forum on the 6th of September at 9 a.m. Atlantic Standard Time. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. This has been Cheryl Senhouse, Finance Innovation Director, and Kiesha Farnum, our Director of Public Sector Projects, talking about designing climate smart projects. Thank you.
Thank you.